Today I'm out driving around in the Cobra, just finishing up the break-in process for the clutch. It's almost there. I don't have too much more mileage left to do on it. So I will be doing some wide open throttle pulls with the brand new clutch just to see how it compares to when the stock clutch was in, if I was actually getting slip or not with it. So if you want to see some wide open throttle pulls with Terminator with the VMP Gen 3R, make sure you're subbed so you don't miss that, because that will be coming up fairly soon. It won't be too much longer from now. But the thing that I really wanted to discuss today was a thread that not a thread, but a post that I saw. I still think in terms of like forums, which are basically dying at this point. But I saw this post in one of the Cobra Facebook groups of someone that brought up the question of what are the mods that you wish you had not done to your Cobra, which got me thinking, when does a build go too far? When have you built your car to go beyond what you originally wanted it to do, or beyond what you thought in your head for what it was going to be like? I do speak from experience with this, not from this car in particular, but with my 94 Cobra, where I geared it around towards mostly track use. It had drag race suspension in it, solid spherical bushings in the rear end for the upper lower control arms. It didn't ride very well at all. And granted, I could have reversed all that, but in the process of building the car like that, I also started to just not really enjoy it and lost my passion with it. And I think that's what led to me ultimately selling it. I think a lot of people find themselves in the same type of situation with a car. Any project car isn't just for Terminators. It can go for any kind of project car. So I got reading through the post more, and it was very interesting seeing the different level of what people said for what they wish they hadn't done with their Terminator. Now this video is specifically going to be around mods that people did to their 0304 Cobra, but this can go for, pretty much any other vehicle that you mod. So I'm going to go through some of these comments. A lot of them really point towards more of the stockish type build for the Cobras, while other people were like, I have 900 plus horsepower, friggin' send it, and they love every minute of it. So it's quite a dichotomy between the two, but I think there's a middle ground, and the middle ground gets discussed quite a bit. So I'm going to pull up some of those comments and read them to you, and we'll go through them one by one, and I'll give my personal thoughts on what I think building my particular car would be as far as going too far, and I'll read my comment that I left on it as well. For this part of the video, I wanted to wait until I got home. I needed my phone to go back and look through screenshots of that post and everything else, and it's not something that I wanted to do while trying to drive the car. So I looked for like a spot to stop and pull over, like a nice scenic area, but couldn't really find anything in the area that I was in. So I just figured I'd finish this off once I got back to the house. But I'll start out with the original post, and it says, so I want to ask a personal question. If you had to do it all over again, what would you do and not do to the car? Personally, I'd love to have an 800 rear wheel horsepower car, stroker cams, all that. That 600 to 650 rear wheel horsepower was the sweet spot for reliability and cost. And this is kind of a common thought as I go along and read through some of these comments. And I'll go through and read a few of the replies from some people, then give my personal opinion and what I wrote in this post later on. This first comment states, I'd love to have a 700 horsepower Cobra, but I'm happy with a ported and pulleyed Eden on E85. Still fun, reliable, and second favorite, blower sound. So that's, one common comment that I did see going through these, is that a lot of people are happy with just a pulleyed Eden or a ported and pulleyed Eden to go along with it. This next comment that I picked out says, I keep having that thought while building mine up. One moment I'm regretting getting a Whipple 2.3 and thinking I should have just went with a 3.0 and supported mods, and I look back at the cost of it compared to what's needed to make good power still from a 2.3. And to think to myself, it's best to keep building it the way I am. So that's like another aspect of this whole thing is doing an aftermarket blower like mine, but kind of regretting the one you went with and wishing you were gone with a bigger supercharger from the beginning instead of going the next bump up with a 2.3, either being an Eaton or a Whipple, or even a Kenny Bell with a 2.2. This next comment says, I had a cammed E85 2.9 Crusher 04 800 rear wheel horsepower. I go back to that in a heartbeat instead of the current built 4-valve twin turbo high horsepower project car now. So obviously this guy got in a little bit too deep for, you know, what the Cobra originally was. I think once you go twin turbos, automatic, solid axle, you're really getting away from what these cars are, you know, known for. You start getting into that realm of kind of stripping its identity away at that point. This one comment says, I had them all in many combos up to 1,100 rear wheel horsepower twin turbo. 500 to 650 in my opinion was the funnest. People get way caught up in chasing rear wheel horsepower and find out it's not everything it's cracked up to be in a street car. And I 100% agree with that too. And I'll get into more on my thoughts with the power level this is at and the comment that I left towards the end of the video in regards to that comment as well. 650 here on a Gen 2 2.3 Whipple on pump 93. In my opinion, once you get into the 700-ish power range, things go downhill. Even at 650, traction is a problem, so beyond that it's kind of pointless. 650 and you're faster than 99% of the cars on the road, which it really is true, because you figure if you're putting down 650, which mine right now is just a little bit over that, at the engine, you know, you're close to 800, if not over 800 horsepower, depending on where in the 600 you are at the rear wheels. But I mean, you're talking about an 800 horsepower street car at that point. At what point is enough? How much more do you really need? I think at that point it kind of comes down to being like a dyno measuring contest of this car pulls more power than that car, but there are also a lot of sacrifices that come with it too. This guy says, if I had to do it all over again, I would skip the ported and pulleyed Eaton setup. So he wished that he would have completely not messed with the Eaton and gone right straight to an aftermarket blower, is my assumption. He didn't elaborate more on that, but that makes sense as well. If I had to do it all over again, I'd jump straight into a return style fuel system instead of beefing up my returnless, and I'd upgrade to a GT500 heat exchanger and trunk tanks, Magnum Trans, VMP blower. Really can't go wrong with that setup. And you know, one of the things that I did with this car very early on when I did the VMP is I had the return style fuel system put in, the 4 Innovation system. I didn't want to mess with pumps and keeping the stock fuel system. It would support the power this car makes with just pumps and doing a few upgrades. This individual says, I've heard it 10,000 times, 650 to 700. That seems to be the common consensus with these cars as far as a street build that's not drag raced, is 650, 700 is like the real sweet spot that a lot of people really enjoy these cars with. This individual says 921 horsepower and full sending it. If I break something, I fix it. You got to pay some kind of cost to be the boss that you want to be. So that's like the other end of the spectrum of all this, going right straight to a completely insane build with close to 1,000 rear wheel horsepower, and where all that falls in as far as all the other builds in between. I was happy at 675, reliable, fun before the auto. So this guy regretted going auto, which I don't blame him. I wouldn't want to do it either. This guy says I wouldn't change anything. I'd stay right around the 470 mark like I am now. It's still reliable, and even with that much power, it can be hard to put down consistently with daily driver tires. And that's, I've covered this topic before, but I'll go into it just a little bit in regards to that. When you start going to an aftermarket blower, you have to consider all the other things that go along with it. How long is your stock clutch going to last? Are you going to have traction problems where you have to upgrade tires like I did, or now I have the Mickey Thompsons on the back? Your fuel system, all that stuff has to be brought into consideration, because you go past the stock limits of what a lot of the stock components will handle on these cars. You start getting above that 500 horsepower range, the stock clutch will definitely handle 500 well within the range of acceptability for that. But things like injectors and your traction and other things like that are start to become a problem. So it's another thing you have to consider when going past that ported Eaton type of a build. And I saved mine for last, where I said I've been having this discussion with myself lately. My entire goal with mine has been to have a powerful street car and have it be reliable. Currently I'm at 676, 640 with a VMP Gen 3R and a 4 return fuel system. It's coming back from the shop in a few days from having a 26 spline upgrade and an RTX clutch. I have a set of ARH headers to go on in the off season, but beyond that I don't want to get into the realm of always having problems, and I also meant traction problems as well. From that point on, I think I'll mostly focus on trying to keep the power down without traction issues and fully build the IRS in the off season as well. I've always said that when I get into the bigger horsepower numbers, I don't want to just spin and have traction problems all the time. Hoping that fully building the IRS will minimize that as much as possible. So that concludes all the comments that I wanted to pick out of that post. I think what it comes down to is when people build these cars or any car to the point of building it too far, it comes down to two things. If you're chasing track numbers, you end up building the suspension to the point of where it's not fun to drive on the street, like I did with my 94 Cobra. It wasn't enjoyable to drive. When I had the suspension redone in this, which now has the Koni shocks and struts and H&R springs on it, it's built more for driving on the street and to be comfortable doing so. So there's that aspect of chasing a number at the track and making the car not enjoyable as far as driving it. I think the other aspect of all this is when you start building those really big horsepower numbers and you start running into tuning issues, drivability issues. You can run into all kinds of things. You may run into cooling issues. I mean, it's all kinds of things that can pop up that you don't have problems with in the 600 to 700 horsepower range. Things can get really complicated the more you throw at these cars. So, in my opinion, with mine, the power number for this is going to stop with the long tube headers when those get put on. I realize it's probably going to pull a little bit more power, some more torque out of it. So that will conclude the video. Let me know with your project vehicle that you have, or your Cobra or your Mustang, for you, what is building it too far? What's the limit of what you want to go to? What's your stopgap where that's enough and I'm not going to build it beyond this point? Because I've been there, I've overbuilt cars before, and that's why I'm glad with my first Terminator that I'm building from the ground up, from basically stock to where I want it to be. I've learned from those past mistakes. So what mistakes have you made on your own? The things have you learned along the way of owning cars like this or anything else that's comparable to something like this? I'll have more coming up with the Cobra later on this summer, so if you're new here, feel free to subscribe. It doesn't cost anything, and I do have some good content coming up with the Cobra. I have a big cruise coming up in about a week, tons of Mustangs for that. Also, more stuff on the Bronco coming up. I still have to do a review on the Bronco. And probably in the next week or so, I'm going to try and get a dyno tune scheduled for sometime this summer to see what this will pull on Torco, just as it sits right now in no other mods, just on the Torco. So there's all that stuff coming up, and of course more topic and things to talk about with the Cobra in general. So if you enjoyed the video, leave it a like. Thanks for watching.